Hello. So today I'll be doing a demonstration on cyber risk analysis using the Siren Investigate platform. So at the core of Siren Investigate is the associative data model. And so we'll be using in our cyber risk analysis different disparate data sources, some coming from internal events, so using elastic security and observability. So we run on Elasticsearch. The heavy lifting comes on Elasticsearch. So data that's being used with elastic security products, such as the endpoint and the SIM, those are accessible to us inside of our cyber risk analysis. So that's gonna allow us to access events that happen internally. A cyber intelligence framework such as threat intelligence framework such as MITRE ATT&CK is going to give us these things that happen in the events such as the technique ID that allow us to join into the threat intelligence framework. That gives us courses of action, that gives us threat groups, but that also gives us a bunch of other ways to join into OSINT threat intelligence information like MISP here, which is going to give us some extended information into like CVEs and other information that we need to do to search on the web. And we also work with things like Q6 Cyber, like a service provider, to also analyze external events, such as malware that infected an organization or a domain or something like that, and pulled information like exfiltrated data and things like that. And so this demonstration actually takes in, and yes, it's simplified, all of these sources together. So taking in an external threat that happened, an external event that happened, and analyzing if internally I'm at risk. So I'm doing OSINT intelligence for risk, and I'm seeing if I'm at risk for that using elastic security, the information that I gathered with elastic security with the SIM. So let's head into the demo here. So I'm actually going to start with what's happening under the hood, and this involves the ingestion of data into what are called entity tables, which are basically, if you know Elasticsearch, they're index patterns, but with this ability to create a associative data model. And so some of these data sources, again, are coming from let's say the endpoint, right? So we have endpoint data. So we have the last 7 days of endpoint data. We have the SIM signals, which are going to be a part of this demo. We have this Q6 data. We have a list intelligence of organizations that we've done. We also have the MITRE framework. So we have like courses of action. We have the attack patterns, which are really crucial. We have threat groups and malware and tactics and things like that. And so this is all going to be crucial. And we have this MISP data as well in here. So we have a good amount of data here. In fact, this is a very big data model. But really, like let's see how you would construct something like this. So if I have a threat group, for example, and I have a list of these, these were 131 groups that were brought in. When I bring up a record, because I've built a data model, this is the enhanced record view. If I go to linked, I can see that there's actually a relationship. And these are kind of like MITRE's, like cite your sources kind of thing, right? So it shows how there's a relationship between this threat group, and I see what's linked, and I can see that there's some sort of attack pattern. There's things like that. There's another thing, process discovery, etc. So there's ways to do that. And how these relationships are built is with this relations tab. So it basically allows me to build these relationships. And when I build it, I start with what I'm looking for, the group. I've had these MITRE relationships, which are like those sources. And what I'm interested in is how would a group, this MITRE threat group, how would that relate to my SIM, right? So that would go into this MITRE attack pattern, right? So through those relationships, the MITRE attack pattern here is going to give me some sort of technique ID that allows me to look at CVE data. It allows me to connect into the MISP OSINT feeds, which are going to be crucial, and allows me to connect into the SIM. And these are relationships that I can build here right on the fly. And there's no additional infrastructure for Elasticsearch to create the data model. We run on, most of the heavy lifting happens on Elasticsearch. We really don't have that much additional stuff that's required. There's no other additional data storage, right? So you build this and the connections happen. It's all search-based, right, with our plugin. So let's say those SIM signals, I have this technique ID, and I mix it with the MITRE attack ID, and I can actually preview that on the fly. So I have those inverse connections. So you can see that I have, I can preview what inside of my SIM matched my attack patterns, like this T1068. I see that this match is actually something that was on my SIM. I can preview that live. And so it's kind of a way here for me to, it's a way for me to build these relationships pretty easily. Now, let's say I didn't want, like this data model here, for example, that I've built, kind of taking off the veil, right? This is actually a pretty big one because this demo is actually used for a very large investigation that involves, different parts of the endpoints and different parts of it. So you can see that this is actually a pretty big thing. We're going to keep our eyes on the prize here. But let's say we wanted to simplify this data model. We do have these things called data spaces. And data spaces allow you to secure and kind of build the kind of data model and data security that you want for the analysts and investigators. So you don't have to give them something that's gigantic. If you just want to show something like the SIM and the MITRE attack framework or just the OSINT data, you can give them a data space so that it's simplified here. So essentially, this demo is going to be about connecting data from my SIM here to the outside world with like OSINT and doing things like that. So not getting too deep into this. Let's actually go into an actual use case of this. So I'll start in our dashboard view. I can change this. So this is going to be very similar to Kibana in just like the dashboard construction way here. And I have the SIM. And we're not replacing the SIM, but we do access that same kind of data, right? So we have the SIM logs here. We have the signals coming from it, and you construct it there. So I have the SIM. What's different is this Relational Navigator, right? So the Relational Navigator is, if I have, for example, my dashboards here that have, let's say, MITRE, it has all this, and I have, let's say, this related attack pattern. If I generate those connections, I see that I have 1,000 or more attack patterns, but here I only have 2 attack patterns in the last 7 days that match, right? If I filter in here and I click, it's only going to show the 2 attack patterns that match that. I'm moving from one dashboard into the other, which is like a core feature of Siren. You can also filter to dashboards, search, this is Elasticsearch, so you have the full search capabilities and filter, and you can then kind of overlay those dashboards. So you can build, the connection between those two and just do dashboard. This is just the basics of Siren. Dashboards aren't like the main thing of Siren, but it is, this Relational Navigator is a really useful feature of Siren, is having those same kind of visualizations that you would have in Kibana, but being able to do that relational navigation. So I have, my endpoint data. I have my MITRE framework. I also have some of this OSINT data, right? So I built in a list of organizations. This is kind of a project that we did earlier where we have, governments and corporations and things like that. And we have their geolocation, we have their domain, we have their, their URL and things like that. And that allows us to join in different ways, right? So we have their like core name here and things like that. And then we have, like, let's say this Q6 data that represents external events that happen, right? So that involves, let's say, a malware hit essentially someone like a domain, for example, someone reported it, some victim, and it has basically the occurrence of this malware on this network, right? So with that relational navigator that I mentioned, if I want to say, show me out of the 4.7 million organizations that have that I have, which ones matched this Q6 data that represents external events. Well, I have 17,000 organizations that match my Q6 data based on just the domain, and I can see kind of the way that it's brought here. Right, it says that it's matching the domain. It's really simple stuff. So I have the SIM data, I have MITRE, I have MISP, I have Q6. So I have all these different data sources. I'm not going to go through dashboard to dashboard to dashboard to dashboard to dashboard. It's not exactly the way to go in this type of threat investigation. It's kind of risk analysis. What I want to do is kind of I'm going to build a simplified workflow here, right? I'm going to search for an external threat, an external event, and I'm going to see how that event related to something that's happening currently, like my SIM. So again, we're generalizing. I'll search for General Motors. So search for General Motors here. And with General Motors, I have some linked items here. So I have the domain. You can see when I look at the domain, those are all the related organizations with that using GM. But I also have some Q6 data that shows that you have TrickBot, you have Azerolt and Vidar that was used here. And I don't know deep information about these things, right? So this is actually pretty good for me too. So I can see that there's some MITRE information about this. So if I click on it, it's going to now, because I joined this data, I can actually look at information about, let's say, Emotet. Looks like Emotet is related to TrickBot. And I can just keep going down this rabbit hole, right? There's all the MISP OSINT feeds, where this is just kind of a hierarchical view, but it shows that there's some sort of link. I think the best way to do this is to kind of whiteboard it. And that's where the graph comes into play. So I take General Motors and I'm going to put it on the graph, and I'll just minimize this. And I will do the same kind of expansion that I had. And I will bring in the Q6 data there. So essentially, this is just showing, the General Motors matches the GM domain, and I have that data. Now, what I'm interested in with that Q6 data is I want to see when I expand, I'll expand by relation here. I want to see what the infected malware is that relates into my MITRE. And so, although I don't have anything about Vidar, that could be just because of my version of MITRE that I put in here, but I have this right here, this Azerolt, Emotet, and TrickBot here. I'm interested in information about that. Now, when I expand by relation, I can see that I can build in the MISP information on it. I can build in the MITRE relationships, which are like the sources. I can look at all the Q6 data, so I have different ways. I also have the ability to show Google News invocations because I have a script here that allows me to run a Google search, and it will ingest it into Elasticsearch. That's just an optional script. And so that will give me some intelligence. If I wanted to, bring in these Google News invocations, I could do that. And so that would allow me to kind of add that and search for that stuff later. But I'm interested that I have this malware information. I have information here. I have OSINT information on this malware. I want to know exactly am I at risk? I have internal events from my SIM that take MITRE technique IDs. So am I at risk of what happened to General Motors here, right? So if I expand my relation with these and I bring in the MITRE relationships and I bring in the MISP OSINT feeds, this is going to blow up a bit, and we're going to clean this up. But this is going to allow me to expand and get all the related things related to these. And what was really cool is that you can see there's some connections right away based on the MISP data. That's because when I read about emotet, I saw something about it being related to TrickBot. And it turns out that one of these things actually talked about, what these OSINT feeds relate to both. So these lenses actually allow you to change the look. So let's enable the tooltip. And we can see, basically a news article that talks about emotet and TrickBot and stuff like that, which is really cool. So it's already showing connections. What I want to do is take in my relationships and see if there's any attack patterns, if there's any related malware tools and threat groups and things like that. And so things are gonna expand out a bit. And because I have these little chains here, these sources, I already know that they're connected. I can actually just click one of these things, and it's these lenses here. And these lenses are going to do a node to edge. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove the relation between. You can see the solid line. And so that basically made it so it cleaned up the graph a bit. It's still messy, and we'll clean it up a bit, but it's not completely unreasonable yet. What we want to do is look on the attack patterns here and see if I expand my relation, see if I hit anything on the SIM. And I don't hit anything on the SIM. I do have some CV data, so I might as well bring that in, but I don't hit anything on the SIM, right? Let's take those attack patterns and group them together, and we'll just call them MITRE relationship patterns. So that cleans those up. And I have essentially like none of those hit on the SIM, but I do also have this MISP OSINT data. And so when I do the MISP OSINT data and I do an expand by relationship and I bring in those attack patterns, I can see this actually matches like 4,000 items in my SIM. Now, attack patterns don't represent that I'm like compromised exactly. Like attack patterns can represent like you left a BIOS setting on or you left this, and there's all these different ways, right? So these are like connections that are all related, right? But there is, they represent risk, right? And so I do have a SIM, and I'm utilizing Elasticsearch's SIM. So it is identifying if something is a high risk or not. So instead of bringing all 4,000 SIM signals, let's only bring in the ones that are like high risk, right? So let's go over here and go to my SIM. We'll just go ahead and just filter in, all the data here, right? So I have 300,000 records. I just want to bring in the SIM signals that were marked as high severity, right? I could drag those in if I wanted to into this. I think what I want to do is just to highlight something is to show how you can filter items here. So under expansion, you see that I have the ability to expand on different ways. What I want is to bring in the CVE and I want the SIM data, but I want to do a dashboard filter. And the dashboard filter only brings in what I filtered on the dashboard. So just those 12 SIM signals, those high severity ones. I have, when I click this expand button here, which is one way to do it, it's only going to bring in SIM signals that I have there and those CVEs. Boom. So now I can see that there's some exploitation for privilege there related to that. I have all this OSINT data here. So I can start like looking at kind of some of these things, right? At any time, if I wanted to, if I had my dashboards open, I can take this thing called a pen. So I do filter, and I can pin this, and I can start looking at these things, right? So this goes over essentially like anything that I highlighted. I can see all these attack patterns. I can see all of the CVEs that I highlighted here, right? I can see, basically all the Q6 events, etc. Right? Everything's been highlighted on my graph and in my dashboard, and that makes it a little bit more digestible. If I was doing a risk analysis, I need to export out, and get this data out here. So I'm interested really on what happened on the sim, right? So if there's this attack pattern, exploitation for privilege, and it was related to this General Motors thing, my generalization, let's actually take those sim events and expand. We'll do extend, and we'll do extend again, and I'll just crop. I can get rid of my MITRE relationships there. And so what this did is it based my sim signals here, my sim signals that were a high severity, and it correlated them together. This process injection, it used the MITRE attack framework, right, to say there is a technique ID for process injection and a technique ID for exploitation for privilege, right? And it's identified those technique IDs, but with MISP, it shares in here that says TrickBot is still alive and well, right? It says right here Azerolt and stuff like that. So there's still some feeds here. So I have enough information to show that. If I wanted to know how I can, do something about these things, like some sort of path, I can actually just focus on these two, right? So I can bring in the relationships of those, and I can expand by relation and say I just want to know the course of action, or I want to know any of the MITRE groups, or if I want to know, what tools are used or malware that's related, etc. If I want to know like the sub techniques that are used, like, what would be related, I can kind of bring that in if I wanted to. Let's say I just want to show the course of action, right, and just kind of get to the point. That's just going to show the course of action. And if I pin this again and go over here, oops. Let's see. Oh, I need to recreate it. Hold on. There we go. I can see now what my course of actions are to handle those attack patterns, right? Everything from simplified perform software updates, right, to doing things. If I wanted to see what the CVEs of those are, I could extend those in. From here, I'm actually doing a risk analysis based off of something that happened at General Motors, and tying it all the way to my sim. I found some events that my sim has done its job, like the people that are using the sim, Elastic has done its job, and now I'm using Siren to kind of just tie this stuff all together. And that's really what the goal of all this is, right? Is to kind of correlate these events, to do risk analysis, kind of bring in these different disparate data sources together onto our associative data model, and do these kind of things. So I hope this was useful, kind of understanding and generalizing what we do in cyber for cyber risk analysis. And I hope to talk soon. Thank you.